Log date 4728.3, Galactic Standard Time. Another promising theory. Failed. Chief Engineer Vexitar slumped in his hoverchair, his forearms drooping in defeat as he stared at the massive starship looming before him. The Eternal Dawn, once the pride of the Zaxarian fleet, now nothing more than an expensive conversation piece in the center courtyard of the Galactic Engineering Academy. Computer, add to personal notes. Quantum harmonic resonance theory unsuccessful. Mark as attempt number. What number are we on? Vexitar's antenna twitched in irritation. Attempt number 2947, Chief Engineer. The computer chirped back, far too cheerfully for his current mood. By the void, has it really been that many? He massaged his temples with his upper arms, while his lower ones continued typing on the holographic interface. My grandfather worked on this ship. My great-grandfather worked on this ship. At this rate, my great-grandchildren will be working on this blasted thing. The Eternal Dawn had been a mystery for 3 generations. Found drifting in deep space near the outer rim, its engine configuration defied all known laws of physics. The ship's power core still hummed with energy after countless centuries, but no one could figure out how to make it actually move. It had become the ultimate engineering challenge, drawing the brightest minds from across the galaxy. "Professor Vexitar," a high-pitched voice called out. He turned to see Administrator Nix hurrying across the courtyard, her ceremonial robes fluttering behind her. "The Board of Directors requests your presence immediately." "Not another budget review," Vexitar groaned. "I've already explained that these experiments are essential to—" No. Nix cut him off, practically bouncing with excitement. "We've received an application from Earth." Vexitar's antenna stood straight up. Earth? The Deathworld? Impossible! Their species only achieved FTL travel 50 years ago. 3 of their engineering cadets have specifically requested to study the Eternal Dawn as part of their final thesis project. Nix's eyes gleamed. Their credentials are unusual, but fascinating. Absolutely not. Vexitar shot up from his chair. This ship is a priceless artifact. We can't let some primitive Deathworlders bang on it with wrenches and whatever other crude tools they use. "The board has already approved their request," Nix said firmly. "They arrive tomorrow." Vexitar looked back at the Eternal Dawn, its sleek hull gleaming in the morning sun. 3 generations of the galaxy's finest minds had failed to unlock its secrets, and now they were going to let humans, take a crack at it? "This is preposterous," he muttered. "What could they possibly do that we haven't tried in the last 100 years? The ship sat silently, as it had for generations, while Vexitar's antenna drooped in resignation. He had a feeling things at the Academy were about to get very interesting, and probably very loud. Vexitar stood rigidly at the Academy's landing pad, flanked by a group of nervous faculty members. The human transport ship descended with what he considered unnecessary speed, kicking up dust and causing several of his colleagues to step back in alarm. "Such aggressive piloting," muttered Professor Zinn, her crystalline form shimmering with anxiety. "Is this how they always fly?" Before anyone could respond, the ship's doors hissed open. 3 figures bounded out, literally bounded, taking advantage of the planet's lower gravity. They were tall by galactic standards, their movements quick and precise, in a way that made several faculty members flinch. "Greetings, Marcus Torres, mechanical specialist," announced the first human, flashing what Vexitar recognized as a smile, though it looked more like a predatory display. "These are my colleagues, Kira Patel, quantum mechanics expert, and Blake Rodriguez, systems engineer." Kira stepped forward, her dark eyes scanning the assembled aliens with unconcealed curiosity. "Thank you for accepting our application. We've studied every publicly available document about the Eternal Dawn." She paused, grinning. "Though I suspect the most interesting stuff isn't in the public records." "Now see here," Vexitar started. but Blake Rodriguez cut him off. "Is that her?" The human was already staring past them at the ship in the courtyard. Without waiting for permission, he started walking toward it, pulling out what appeared to be primitive scanning equipment. "Oh man, look at those hull configurations. Kira, are you seeing this?" "Excuse me." Vexitar hurried after them, his forearms gesturing in agitation. "There are protocols, safety measures. You can't just—" Marcus Torres kept pace with him easily, that unnerving smile still in place. "With all due respect, Chief Engineer, your safety protocols haven't solved the problem in 3 generations. Maybe it's time for a fresh perspective." "A fresh perspective doesn't mean ignoring centuries of established procedures." Professor Zinn had caught up with them, her crystalline form vibrating with distress. "The quantum matrices alone could—" "Could what?" Kira called back, already climbing up the ship's boarding ramp. "Collapse? They're stable, have been for centuries according to your own records. Blake, check out these door mechanisms." "Already on it!" Blake had somehow already removed an access panel, his hands moving with alarming speed as he examined the internal components. "This is unprecedented." Vexitar's antennae were practically tied in knots. "Administrator Nix, surely you can't allow—" "Actually," Nix stepped forward, looking annoyingly amused, "their application specifically requested hands-on access. The board approved it. Did they approve them dismantling it?" Vexitar watched in horror as Marcus Torres pressed his ear against the hull, tapping it at different points and nodding to himself. "Found something!" Marcus called out. "Kira, that resonance theory you had. I think you were onto something. But it's not in the engine. It's in the structural supports." The 3 humans converged, talking rapidly in their harsh language while pointing at different parts of the ship. They moved with an efficiency that was almost frightening, completely ignoring the growing crowd of shocked alien academics. "Administrator," Vexitar said weakly, "I must protest. This is not how we conduct research here." "No," Nix agreed, watching as the humans continued their unconventional investigation. "Perhaps that's exactly why we should let them continue." "You want to do what?" Vexitar's voice hit a pitch he didn't know he could reach. Marcus Torres stood before the engineering board, pointing at a holographic display of the Eternal Dawn's schematics. "We need to power down the containment field and get inside the main drive housing." "Impossible!" Professor Zinn's crystalline form flickered in distress. "The radiation levels alone would—" "Be well within human tolerance," Kira interrupted, pulling up their biological data. "We've checked the readings. What you consider lethal, we consider a light sunbath back home." The assembled alien engineers stared at the numbers in disbelief. Blake Rodriguez took advantage of their shock to continue the presentation. "Look, we've found something weird in the structural vibrations. The ship isn't broken. It's waiting for the right input." "The right input?" Vexitar's antenna twitched. "We've tried every possible digital input," Marcus corrected. "But what if it's not about programming? What if it's about physical resonance?" To demonstrate, he pulled out a simple metal tuning fork, a primitive Earth instrument that made several faculty members wince at its simplicity. He struck it against the table, then pressed it against the wall. The entire room vibrated in response. "That's your sophisticated solution? Hitting things?" Professor Zinn was practically crystallizing with indignation. "Sometimes the old ways work best," Kira said, already strapping on what looked like primitive protective gear. "Now, who's going to help us get that drive housing open?" What followed was a display that would haunt the Academy's security footage for years to come. The 3 humans, protected by what the alien faculty considered woefully inadequate safety equipment, manually extracted the 2-ton drive housing, using nothing but hydraulic jacks and their own shocking physical strength. "Did you see that? They're lifting it themselves," a junior engineer whispered, watching Marcus and Blake coordinate their movements with practiced ease. "Their endurance is unsettling," another faculty member noted, as the humans worked continuously for hours in conditions that would have exhausted most species. Kira had wedged herself into a space that Vexitar's species would have needed specialized micro-drones to access. Her voice echoed from inside the machinery. Found it! Blake, you were right. There's a physical tumbler system in here. It's not electronic at all. A what? Vexitar peered into the opening. Like an old Earth safe, Marcus explained, wiping sweat from his forehead. You need the right sequence of physical movements to unlock it. No wonder your digital attempts didn't work. This ship was designed to be maintainable even if all power failed. But that's... Vexitar struggled to process this revelation. Primitive. Blake grinned. Sometimes primitive is better. No software to fail, no quantum states to collapse, just good old-fashioned mechanical engineering. Got it mapped! Kira emerged, covered in centuries-old dust, but grinning triumphantly. She held up a hand-drawn diagram, actual physical markings on primitive paper. The whole engine's a mechanical combination lock. Must be a safeguard against unauthorized access. And you figured this out by touching it? Professor Zinn asked incredulously. By listening, Marcus corrected. Every piece of machinery has a voice. You just have to know how to interpret it. The three humans gathered around their crude diagram, pointing and discussing while the alien faculty watched in a mixture of horror and fascination. They were breaking every protocol, ignoring centuries of theoretical framework, and yet... They actually found something new, Administrator Nix whispered to Vexitar. In 3 hours, they discovered what we missed in 3 generations. Because we were looking for complexity, Vexitar realized, watching the humans plan their next move. We never considered that the answer might be simple. Right, Kira called out, apparently having heard him. Now, who's ready to see this baby power up? We just need to hit the right sequence of resonance points and... The aliens watched, equal parts terrified and fascinated, as the humans prepared to wake a ship that had slept for centuries, using nothing more sophisticated than precisely calculated strikes against its hull. All right, Blake, give me a C-sharp, Marcus called out, positioned at what they'd identified as the first resonance point. The entire engineering faculty watched in horror as Blake struck a tuning fork against the ancient hull. This is insanity, Professor Zinn whispered. They're going to destroy a priceless artifact with Earth musical instruments. But the ship responded. A deep harmonic vibration spread through the hull, and previously dark panels began to flicker with faint light. The humans had rigged up a bizarre combination of equipment, some from their own supplies, others borrowed from the Academy's labs, and a few that appeared to be made from cafeteria supplies. "Kira, you're up!" Marcus shouted. "Second sequence point!" Kira, suspended from what looked like primitive climbing gear, swung to another section of the hull. The alien observers gasped as she dangled precariously, 30 feet above the ground. "Our safety drones could do that," Vexitar protested. "Drones don't have human instinct," Kira replied, pulling out what appeared to be a modified welding torch. "Sometimes you need to feel the vibrations directly. Blake, give me that resonance tone again." The ship's hum changed pitch. More systems flickered to life. "This is unprecedented," a senior faculty member burst out. "They haven't even run a proper diagnostic sequence. The power grid could—" "The power grid is fine," Blake interrupted, checking readings on a device that seemed cobbled together from spare parts. "The ship's responding exactly like we predicted. It's not about running diagnostics. It's about waking her up gently." Marcus had moved to another position, sweat pouring down his face as he worked in the high-gravity zone near the engine core. Most species needed mechanical assistance in such conditions, but the humans seemed to relish the challenge. "You know," he grunted, adjusting something with a wrench that looked comically large to the alien observers, "on Earth, we have these things called mechanical watches. Beautiful things. All gears and springs, no electronics. This ship's engine, same principle, just scaled up about 1,000,000 times." "That's absurd," Professor Zinn protested. "The computational requirements alone—" "Aren't computational at all," Kira called down. "They're mechanical. The ship's entire drive system is one giant mechanical calculator. That's why it's still running after all these centuries. No quantum decay, no software corruption." just precisely engineered parts waiting for the right sequence of physical inputs. The humans continued their work, moving with what seemed like reckless speed to the watching aliens. They violated at least 30 safety protocols in the first hour alone. Yet each violation seemed purposeful, each risk calculated. "Stop!" Vexitar suddenly shouted. "The containment field is fluctuating." "It's supposed to," Blake said calmly, not even looking up from his work. "The field isn't containing anything. It's part of the drive mechanism. Watch." He struck another precise point on the hull. The containment field pulsed, and another section of the ship hummed to life. "This goes against everything we know about Starship engineering," a junior faculty member whispered. "Maybe that's the problem," Administrator Nix mused. "We've been so focused on what we know, we forgot to consider what we don't know." The tension in the air grew thicker as the humans continued their unconventional repairs. Each success seemed to vindicate their methods, much to the faculty's growing discomfort. They worked like a well-oiled machine, calling out measurements and adjustments in their harsh language, their movements synchronized despite the seeming chaos of their approach. "Main sequence almost ready," Kira announced, now hanging upside down from her safety harness to reach a particularly tricky spot. "Marcus, how's that timing chain?" "Almost. Got it." Marcus's voice was strained from the high gravity but triumphant. "Blake, start the resonance sequence." Blake pulled out what looked like a crude percussion instrument. Several faculty members covered their auditory organs in anticipation of disaster. "You can't possibly," Vexitar began, but Blake had already begun, striking specific points in a complex rhythm. The ship's hum changed, deepened, became more purposeful. Lights began cycling in sequence down its hull. "It's destabilizing," Professor Zinn cried. "It's waking up," Kira corrected, grinning despite being covered in mechanical fluids. "And boy, does she have a story to tell us." The humans exchanged knowing looks as the ship's systems continued to activate. They knew something the aliens didn't, something they'd discovered through their hands-on approach, something that was about to change everything the Galactic Engineering Academy thought they knew about Starship design. And judging by their expressions, the revelation was going to be spectacular. The Eternal Dawn's engine core pulsed with a deep, resonant frequency that seemed to bypass the ears and vibrate directly in the bones. For the humans, it was a familiar sensation. For the alien faculty, it was revolutionary. "No, that's impossible," Professor Zinn stammered, her crystalline form vibrating in sync with the ship. "Those harmonics, they're identical to—" "A heartbeat," Marcus finished, grinning broadly. "The ship's drive system mimics organic rhythms. And you know who's really good at maintaining complex biological rhythms?" "Deathworlders," Vexitar whispered, his antenna drooping in sudden understanding. The ship wasn't broken. It was waiting for someone strong enough to physically prime the system, Kira confirmed, rappelling down from her perch. The radiation, the high gravity near the core, the need for precise physical feedback, it's all part of the design. This ship was built by and for species that evolved on high-gravity worlds. Blake was already connecting their crude diagnostic tools to the newly awakened systems. "Look at these readings. The ship doesn't just use mechanical computing, it uses mechanical learning. Each physical interaction teaches it, tunes it, makes it more responsive, like muscle memory." The assembled aliens crowded around the displays, their previous skepticism forgotten in the face of data they couldn't deny. The ship was doing things that should have been impossible without quantum computers, yet it was achieving them through purely mechanical means. "But how?" a junior engineer demanded. "How can simple mechanical systems process such complex calculations?" Marcus laughed. "Simple? There's nothing simple about it. Here, let me show you." He led them to a section they had opened earlier. Inside was an intricate maze of gears, levers, and counterweights, all moving in perfect synchronization. This isn't just engineering, it's art. Every component serves multiple purposes. The physical structure is the computer. The vibrations are the programming language. "Watch this," Kira called out. She struck a specific point on the hull with precise force. The entire system shifted, gears realigning, weights redistributing. The ship just solved a complex navigational equation using nothing but mechanical movement. No electronics required. "And that's not even the crazy part," Blake added, excitement clear in his voice. "The whole system is self-repairing. These aren't just gears, they're more like bones. The mechanical stress actually makes them stronger over time." The revelation hit the alien engineers like a physical blow. Generations of experts had assumed the ship was damaged, that its systems were degraded. In reality, it had been getting stronger, waiting for pilots capable of handling its unique interface. The previous crews, Vexitar realized, they would have been too careful, too gentle. They would have relied on automation and computer control. "Exactly," Marcus beamed. "This ship doesn't want to be commanded. It wants to be worked with, like training a horse." The blank stares from the alien faculty reminded him that Earth analogies might not translate well. "Look," Kira stepped in. "Everyone assumed this was a broken example of familiar technology, but it's not. It's a perfect example of unfamiliar technology. The entire ship is one giant mechanical computer, powered by the physical input of its crew. No software to corrupt, no quantum states to decrypt. Just pure, beautiful engineering." As if to emphasize her point, the engine's rhythm shifted again, settling into a steady pulse that felt almost alive. Displays that had confused generations of experts suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't displays at all, but mechanical feedback interfaces designed to be felt rather than read. "And now for the really fun part," Blake said, pulling up their final calculations. "Based on these readings, the Eternal Dawn isn't just a ship. It's a prototype. A proof of concept for an entire class of vessels that could operate in conditions that would fry any conventional electronics." The implications hit home. Solar flares, radiation zones, quantum disturbances. None of them would affect a ship that ran on purely mechanical principles. It was a design philosophy so advanced it looked primitive, so complex it appeared simple. Professor Zinn's crystalline form shimmered with excitement. "The academic papers alone. This will revolutionize our understanding of—" "Papers?" Marcus interrupted, still grinning. "Why write about it when we can demonstrate it? The ship's ready for her first flight in centuries." A shocked silence fell over the gathering. "You can't be serious," Vexitar protested. "Even if your theories are correct, the regulatory requirements alone would—" The ship's engine note changed again, rising to a confident thrum that vibrated through the entire academy. Lights blazed to life along its hull, not the harsh electronic glare they were used to, but a warm, organic pulse that seemed to invite interaction. "Sometimes," Kira said, patting the hull affectionately, "you have to stop theorizing and start doing. Who wants to help us take her up?" The aliens stared at the humans, then at the ship, then at each other. Generations of careful, methodical research warred with the undeniable evidence before them. "I volunteer," Administrator Nix stepped forward, her eyes gleaming. "After all, someone needs to document this unconventional approach." The humans' grins grew wider. The ship's pulse strengthened, as if recognizing kindred spirits in these beings, who understood that sometimes the most sophisticated solution was the one you could feel in your bones. The Eternal Dawn hung in high orbit, its hull gleaming in the light of twin suns. Below, the Galactic Engineering Academy's observation deck was packed with academics, officials, and reporters from across the galaxy. They watched in stunned silence as the ancient vessel performed maneuvers that should have been impossible for a ship its size. "Look at those response times," Blake commented, monitoring the mechanical feedback through direct contact with the control interface. "She's not just moving, she's dancing." The ship executed a perfect spiral, mechanical systems purring with satisfaction. Marcus and Kira worked in tandem at the physical control stations, their movements resembling a choreographed routine more than traditional piloting. Sweat gleamed on their faces from the exertion, but their grins never wavered. "Remarkable," Administrator Nix breathed, watching from her observer's station. The ship actually performs better under high-stress maneuvers. It's almost as if it was designed for combat, Vexitar finished, his antenna twitching with excitement. A warship that could operate in conditions that would disable electronic systems. No wonder its designers used mechanical computing. The revelation spread through the observation deck. This wasn't just a new way of building ships. It was an entirely new approach to space combat. A vessel that could fly through solar flares, dance through radiation storms, and emerge stronger from conditions that would cripple conventional craft. Beginning final test sequence, Marcus announced. Kira, ready for the gravity well simulation? Born ready. She braced herself at her station. Blake, give us the beat. Blake began a complex sequence of inputs that looked more like percussion than engineering. The ship responded instantly, its mechanical systems singing in harmony with his movements. The observers watched in amazement as the eternal dawn dove toward the planet's atmosphere, pulled up mere kilometers from the surface, and shot back into space in one fluid motion. Impossible, Professor Zinn exclaimed. The gravitational forces alone should have... Should have what? Kira called back, breathing heavily but triumphant. Torn the ship apart, overloaded the systems. The harder you push this baby, the better she responds, just like us humans. Strength through adversity. The demonstration continued for another hour, each maneuver more impressive than the last. By the time they returned to dock, the academic community was in an uproar. Decades of theoretical frameworks were being rewritten on the spot. The implications are staggering, a senior researcher muttered, reviewing the data, if we apply these principles to modern ships. We already have designs drawn up, Blake said, pulling out their crude paper sketches. Hybrid systems that combine mechanical computing with modern technology. Ships that can switch between electronic and mechanical control depending on conditions. The aliens crowded around the drawings, their earlier disdain for primitive methods completely forgotten. The elegance of the solutions was undeniable. But this means... Professor Zinn paused, her crystalline form flickering with realization. This means we've been approaching engineering all wrong. We've been trying to protect our ships from harsh conditions instead of designing them to thrive in them. Exactly! Marcus clapped her on what he hoped was her shoulder. Stop fighting the environment and start working with it. That's how we survived on Earth. That's how we build our ships. Administrator Nix was already drafting a proposal on her datapad. We'll need to establish new research departments, training programs. The physical requirements alone will need completely new protocols. And that's where we come in, Kira smiled. Earth is offering to establish a joint engineering program. Your theoretical knowledge combined with our practical experience. Plus, you know, our useful tendency to survive conditions that would kill most species. The announcement caused another stir of excitement. The implications weren't just technological, they were cultural. The galaxy was finally beginning to understand what humans could bring to the table. Vexitar watched as his colleagues swarmed the humans, asking questions, proposing collaborations, already planning new experiments. His antenna swayed thoughtfully. You know, he said to no one in particular, my grandfather used to say that true innovation often looks like madness at first. I never really understood what he meant until today. The eternal dawn loomed above them, its mechanical heart beating in a steady rhythm that seemed to echo with possibilities. In just a few days, 3 human cadets had not only solved a generational puzzle, but had opened up entirely new avenues of technological development. So, Blake approached Vexitar, still covered in mechanical fluids and grinning. About that teaching position we discussed. After this, Vexitar laughed, a sound that surprised even him. I think we'd be mad not to offer you all permanent positions. The Academy needs more of this. What do you call it? Hands-on learning, Marcus supplied, showing off his calloused hands. Sometimes you have to get dirty to make real progress. The news was already spreading across the galaxy. Humanity, barely a blip in the galactic community, had just revolutionized Starship engineering, not through advanced technology or complex theories, but through their unique ability to thrive in conditions others found impossible. Kira stood at the observation window, watching as maintenance crews swarmed over the eternal dawn, learning its mechanical secrets. "You know what the best part is?" she mused. "What's that?" Administrator Nix asked. "This is just the beginning. Wait until we show you what else we can do." The others joined her at the window, watching as the ancient ship pulsed with new life, its mechanical heart beating in time with the future they'd just unleashed. A future where humanity's primitive approaches might just be exactly what the galaxy needed. And somewhere in the distance, their transport ship pilot was already taking bets on how long it would take before the aliens realized that this was just the tip of the human innovation iceberg. The age of mechanical revolution had begun. And it started, as all good human stories do, with someone looking at an impossible problem and saying, "Hey, what if we try hitting it?"